And we're
All
live.
righty. Hello.
Hi there.
I am delighted to be able to spend some time with Scott Abel. Scott is the widely recognized entity behind the Content Wrangler, a leading content strategist known for helping companies organize how they create, maintain, and deliver information for those who need it. He's the co author of the Intelligent Content Book, a primer in language for content strategy, as which I have used to help me with content strategy, as well as the creator of the Content Strategy series of books from XML Press. Scott presents at prestigious content industry conferences such as the Intelligent Conference, LavaCon, and Content Marketing World. His blog is The Content Wrangler. I highly encourage you to subscribe to his newsletter. It's a go to resource for communication professionals seeking insights on content management strategy. Delighted to have you here
Thank you.
talking about reusable content, future content, AI, and the rest of the world. So let me start out by asking you, what is content architecture?
Oh, well, that's a really good question. And I think that depends on who you ask with the answer you'll get. I am, first of all, not a content architecture expert. In other words, I don't spend my whole day doing content architecture or information architecture, but I'm surrounded by people that are somehow impacted by it. And we learn through other avenues of examining the content in these companies that are having challenges, that there are opportunities to use information architecture to help them develop the capabilities that they need. So basically, if you think about architecture and information as two separate words, or content and architecture, and you look them up in the dictionary and you marry them together, it gives you a pretty good idea at a high level of what content architecture folks do. But today their roles are changing. And I think that's the
Yes.
exciting thing.
I was at the Information Architecture Summit that was in Las Vegas. I can't remember which one it was.
Mhm.
It was interesting because it was held at a casino and everyone was using the Tony Braxton store to find out where the conference was being held.
Oh,
That we all had a wayfindings and the Tony Braxton store was our memory. But anyway, we had an architect speak. Jonathan, his last name fails me. He was the on-site architect for the Seattle Library from Rem Koolhaas.
mm,
And part of his speech was telling us that the real architects, the people who go to architecture school and have to pass a rather arduous certification exam, were considering legal action to keep us from using the word architect
I
because
remember
there's
this.
only one architect in the room, and that was him. But
Yeah.
now you're right. There's content architects, there's UX architects, there's SEO architects. We're
Yeah.
all architects now.
And I should probably answer that question. So, I mean, I think that the term that we're talking about today, information architecture, which is of course at the banner of our talk today,
Yes.
is that practice of organizing and making presentable information in a way that's easy to understand for humans and for them to find it as well. So findability and understandability. However,
Exactly.
now machines are in the way. So I
Mm.
think it's the practice of organizing and presenting information to make it easier for machines to understand exactly what it is in
Right.
order for the machines to help people find and understand it.
Exactly right. And it's not necessarily a bad term because of the way systems work and absorb information or content. One of my biggest jihads with regard to content and SEO is that information retrieval systems determine um, relevance by where content is placed, meaning that if content at the top of the page is deemed to be better for relevance ranking than the bottom, because none of us go to the bottom of the page. Nobody scrolls. I look in all when I do GA4 analysis and all of that, I see that less than 25% of the people scroll past
Yeah.
the top of the page. So what you choose to put there is very important. And what I find is that who's ever doing it isn't consulting the content strategist because what we get above the fold is big pictures,
Yeah.
big hero graphics.
I've seen this before, so let me step back and say first, I remember this conference you were referring to, and
Yes.
I think if my memory serves me right, and people who know me know that I've had some issues with my brain over the last decade, but I'm still here, and I believe this
Yes. Thank
company
God.
I believe it's functioning appropriate enough to explain this, which is there was a discussion about whether or not we should call ourselves, if we deem ourselves to be information architects, should we call ourselves that? What's in a name was the discussion. And I think
Right.
it was Lou Rosenfeld who started that. Does that make sense? Because I think,
I may have been. I can't remember where they adopted it. I mean, the polar bear book is named Information Architecture in the
right,
World Wide Web, and that's been around for what, 14 years, 15
yeah,
years?
I do remember the architects coming by and saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
wait a minute." You know,
Yes.
and I'm
Right,
like, well, I could call myself also a content doctor, but nobody thinks I'm diagnosing their,
right.
illnesses. It's not going to confuse people. So I think that what we call each other is less important than what we do and how we do it.
Exactly, exactly, and that it is successful. So with content architecture, what is then future-proof content for
See,
you?
I love this topic because I think the problem with future proof is that it's not real. First of all, like I dislike us using this word, and I should
Yeah,
say that in this book, I am certain that I have not looked in here, but I'm certain that the word future proof is in there, because in the early '90s and late 2000s, we used to describe what we were trying to accomplish, which was create intelligent content. And we would give it all these characteristics. It was semantically rich, it was modular, it was repurposable, and it was future proof, right? But what I don't like about that word is it implies that there's a level of durability or some kind of immunity to change. That's just not realistic. It's not achievable. The future is unpredictable inherently, right? And while we can prepare for all kinds of trends or scenarios, and that's what we're doing now, there's always wild cards in the mix, unexpected technological breakthroughs, for example, that we didn't see coming, global events like COVID-19, shifts in consumer behavior that, for whatever reason, were not anticipated. This upends almost every one of our best laid plans because we can't plan for them. So I think here's a great example: blockbuster companies that failed to adapt to streaming technologies, or maybe they didn't see the innovative gadgets that were coming along and they became irrelevant because their new regulations or standards demonstrated that no matter how well prepared they were, some challenges were just impossible for them to predict or to mitigate. And so a more realistic approach might be to say future ready rather than aiming to
right.
be future proof. How could we be future ready? And in my brain, my brain says this term is something that tells us that being ready means embracing change and being prepared to pivot. So it's the preparation for being ready for the future. It's not proofing yourself against the future. Does that make sense to you?
It certainly does, and I was just thinking about, a social scientist, and I have to look it up, who talked about how our tools change us.
Yeah, they totally
You
do.
know, the tools that we use change, but then the tools change us and how we do it. And now you have this generative landscape where we have machines that are interpreting content and presenting it to customers looking for information. But yet we don't have any visibility into the success or accuracy of those tools. Whereas before, I can ask generative AI, "What is this?" And it will give me an answer. Or I could go to a search engine and look at the list of results and say, intuitively, this looks like what I want.
Yeah.
This looks true. Or the search engine has achieved that with its ranking algorithms. But in terms of content strategy and content, creation and presentation and connection, how do we know what we're seeing is right or what the content strategist intended?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's not an easy answer to it right this second because everything is in flux, right? Everything is moving around. People believe they're using artificial intelligence, generative AI to the best of their abilities when they use Chat GPT, which is like,
Right.
it's like a tricycle, but
Right.
compared to a Kawasaki motorcycle or a Harley Davidson, right?
Right.
Yeah, they both have wheels that you can get someplace on them, but they're totally different things, and they have a level of maturity and an intent and a purpose that's built in. So I think part of our challenge is figuring out what does the truth look like? who are the purveyors of the truth. And if it's about product information, which is not very scandalous or, politically motivated, usually it's just about some facts about a product. It seems to me that the information architecture role is to organize that content in a way that makes sense for machines to process and understand, so it can deliver the better, clearer answers. I won't say truthful, because we don't always know, right, whether the humans make the mistakes, right, and the human generated content is often what the machine is reading. But I think our danger is in recycling a bunch of automated generated content and then assuming that that's the truth when an LLM crawls that. And what do we do with that? And what do we do with the internet that existed before generative AI? If generative AI is cranking out web pages like, in microseconds right now, then is the web even the web if you crawl it today, or are you crawling a bunch of stuff that's just being regenerated? It
But
asks
is
questions.
AI generated content bad, or is it like Jessica Rabbit? It's not bad, it's just drawn that way sometimes.
I would say that depends on the artist, because
Yeah,
the prompt is what gets you. The generative AI doesn't do anything but follow pattern instructions, right?
right.
People
Well,
people inherently like to tell other people what not to do in order to get what they want. So
right.
don't call me this, call me that, because I want that. But
Mhm.
you request something from a generative AI, you're asking it to crawl something and predict what the answer you want is based on what it knows. And if it's just recycling a bunch of poorly prompted, created content, then I wonder if the depth of the content gets lost somewhere in databases that aren't exposed for people
It's a good
to
question.
the
Oh,
public crawl.
you froze up a little bit there. It's a good question, and 2 things I remind myself of is, 1, the individuals who develop and build these applications do
Mhm.
not understand how they generate the answers they do. They
Yeah.
cannot tell you where it happened or what connection between firings in the layers created the pattern which caused the system to say, "This is the answer that I know is correct based on, the data that I've been given." So how can we know that it's the truth or it's not the truth or whatever?
I think we're going to just have to mature as a discipline and recognize that these tools are just like playthings right now.
Yes,
There are definitely some serious tools in the mix somewhere, but I doubt that they're exposing them to us and giving them to us for free. And even if they are, aren't we just the product when we're given something for free? Because they're learning from how we're using it. And
right.
I think that plays a big role in what the future holds. And I think if you take a step back and think, today we're delivering individualized answers to product information questions. For example, we might deliver role-based content, and depending on the role you serve in a company or some other kind of organization, the system would give you a different kind of content back. And that's not based on artificial intelligence, it's based on semantic relationships, right, between the
Sure.
content. And a lot of content creators, and even information architects for that matter, have not really been involved in the minutia of making those relationships explicit and then building a knowledge graph to represent it. And I think that, on this kind of show, you'll have people like Kurt Kakel, who's a
Right.
guest, who could talk in depth about those topics, and Mike Ian Tosca, who will also be participating. But it does beg the question: what does information architecture, as a discipline, need to communicate to IAs
Right.
about those relationships so that we don't have to rely on the AI? The other issue is, should we rely on the AI when it takes a bunch of energy to crawl everything and then come up with an answer when you could just point it to an explicit answer? So maybe we have to be the arbiters of the truth that we're aware of, and then be smart enough to prompt the AI to help us with the other stuff that we can't see so clearly.
Or it's like Octavia Butler, I think, intimated when she said, "Truth is part of the imagination. It just goes with the speaker."
I think
So
those.
there is no absolute truth. But it leads me to something that came up earlier in my discussion with Prasad and my frustration with my community of information architects, in that we need to understand the system. Like, we need to embrace the system as a user. Now, it's easy for us to do that with, you know, card sort and user interviews and personas with other people that are thought processing bipeds like us. But with machines, it's different. And what I seem to be getting is the computer science is hard. Barbie says computer science is hard. Let's go shopping, you know, instead, or let's just talk about color palettes
Right.
and
Or ethics. It always goes to
yeah,
ethics. But what's right or wrong
exactly.
about
Or managing distant UX
yeah.
teams instead of what we're seeing here and in your upcoming webinar, cross discipline education and understanding
I
and
wonder if we also have to,
cooperation.
I wonder if we also have to become representatives, communication representatives for our discipline to help other related disciplines better understand what it is we could bring to the equation
Yes,
so that we don't get left out of the mix, first of all, because they're unaware of what our skills are and what we could possibly add to the mix. And if we're silent, I think it's just going to be created as an IT project, and it's going to miss a lot of the insights that we have as human professional communicators.
indeed. And this was my frustration, and I brought it up earlier again, in that Google did a study on how human factors people understand computer science, you know, the
Right.
computer science. And of course, their study was biased because half of the study recipients worked at Google.
Of course.
But out of it came their what is called pair AI research, something, whatever, AI research, where it was a program that created collateral for human factors people, sort of like See Spot Run, Go Spot Go,
Right.
to help them understand. But it was all one way. It was all computer science to human factors. There's no
Hmm.
section that says, and now let me tell you about content strategy or how people understand these things or the semantics of pulling it together. So that's the goal. And I think you're, you know, certainly appreciated here. And I'll absolutely sign up for your webinar because we need more of that. We need more computer scientists talking at LavaCon about large language models and actually how they work
Yeah.
in a way that people can understand.
I agree. I think the other thing is at the University of California, Berkeley, and certainly not only limited to there, there's a program also at the University of Washington, and I'm certain at a few other schools, called the School of Information. And the School
Yes.
of Information at Berkeley was a combination of the library science personnel, who, by the way, had no students in their class. So they were all being paid with zero students. So there was nobody going for a library science degree. So they had to pay them anyway. And then they had computer science people, and they said, we'll put computer science and library science together and call it information. The
Right.
challenge was
Information science.
we weren't teaching at the intersection of those two things.
Yes.
So, learning about how library science performs as an information manager is probably just utility in there somewhere. But not knowing how it connects to computer science wasn't useful to the
Mhm.
average information developer kind of student, because they were learning from the wrong perspective. And it was almost like the smart people that knew about information and computers were not involved in the
Right.
decision to create this school. But over time, it's matured. And now we have a discipline where they're starting to cross pollinate and they're talking to each other. And I think, Marianne, that leads to a lot of aha moments where
Yes.
we can see as humans that we have paths that are they're divergent, but they crisscross every once in a while. And where they overlap is an opportunity for us to do something and build more capability for our solutions that we're making.
Yes. Yes. And I'm a graduate of the University of Washington iSchool. I went
Bob Boyko,
tw
right?
20 years ago when I was a mere child and my hair was a different color. But I talked myself into the program by saying I wanted to be a better information architect.
Right.
And now I teach one class a year at the university, Introduction to Information Retrieval.
Mhm.
And I notice that many of my students now are content strategists and people who
Right.
want to be information architects. So the value of that crossing the streams is very important and useful in these areas. But again, it's the practitioners getting practitioners on board. And, you know, there are some information architects that are doing that. Jorge Arango, who's part of this program,
Mhm.
has been experimenting and writing extensively on RAG. But again, I hope that we get behind the scenes and learn more about systems. System thinking and soft system methodology are my two cudgels that I try and make that happen.
I also think that it's important for us to recognize that the tool landscape is a moving target and
Yes.
it is moving rapidly. And in some instances, that movement is publicly disclosed, and in others, it is a surprise attack. Like all of a sudden, there's a new technology. Like, where did that come from?
Right.
But all of it is in a fast train. It's just zooming down the tracks, and we're
Hmm.
not going to be able to be perfect. Kind of back to your analogy of the meeting doesn't have to be flawless. With sometimes something happens. It's kind of that way with our thinking about information architecture. I wonder if the mistakes that we make right now are really the valuable lessons that are going to add to our understanding in the future.
I hope not. I mean, I hope that we can morph into a more uh, integrated role in the development of these systems so that they don't run into the issues of, misaligned objectives or, incomplete analysis of the training data, making sure that it represents everything that needs to be represented for correct answering. And there are tools that are facilitating that. There are, knowledge graph generation tools
Yeah.
where you don't really have to know how to build one yourself anymore, which is good. And the one that I've been using the most is Google's new LLM notebook application,
Mhm.
where you can take a very complex article on, say, computer science or RAG or whatever, and then ask it to do a detailed outline as if you were a high school student
Yeah.
or as if you were a college student.
Or as if you were a high school teacher and
Yes,
extract lessons from each one of those. I've seen that done, and it's to me this is a um, another example of that disruptive, innovative technology that's shaking things up. That is a good thing if we can apply it in ways that benefit everybody.
exactly. And then to, go forward with the idea of future proofing content. Now, I know that Carrie Hayne and Mike Atherton wrote a book about dynamic content. Do you see that as a critical factor? And what do we need to know about dynamic content and those types of systems?
I would say the difference between dynamic content and static content, at least if you think about a static website, is a static
Hmm.
website is generated and then it's there and it's not going to change and it's probably information that doesn't need to change. It has very little interactivity and it certainly probably has absolutely no personalization or individualization of
Right,
information. So you can't do role-based content in something that's just generated on the fly and then smacked up there. So we have to have the interactive sciences and the involved in our information architecture. And I think that having the systems understand what it is we're trying to generate at the other end is going to be a lot more important. That dynamic ability also is aided by AI because AI could run a check, right? Some kind of let's think about a mortgage document. If you wanted to have a mortgage loan application in a web browser, for example, and it needed to change based on the state that the person was in and the terms of the loan or whatever, you could enter all that into a database and then the AI could insert those variables in there. But one thing it won't know that it won't know until each day at midnight or whatever time the clock ticks over
right,
and a new date starts is it won't know the rate at which that money can be loaned to that person. And
right.
so that piece of content is dynamic, right? It's always changing based on criteria outside of the site. And with AI and the web technologies together, I think you're going to see a lot more integration of these little variable pieces of content that are inserted inside of paragraphs that um, won't force a person to go look up the information and then go back to a content management system and change that number and then publish it again, which is kind of how a lot of companies do it today because we don't have that smart connection in our APIs yet because the content isn't designed to be that modular, right? Where that little piece of content is a variable
Right.
instead of just some numbers typed in there.
That one element, that one crucial element can throw it all off.
Think about information graphics, infographics, which you kind of, had their day for a while. They were super popular for a while, but I always found them to be stale by the next day.
Sure.
Maybe not all infographics, but a lot of that stuff is fast changing information. But what if you had a graphic that was generated in a web browser and the variable data pieces changed as the data changes? So as the World Health Administration releases data, your graphic changes. To
Right.
me, That's the power of the smarts and the semantics and the information architecture all being weaved together to produce a deliverable that keeps the content fresh and updated. And it doesn't rely on the AI to crawl all this content to try to find that number, right? We know where the number comes from. Just tell the AI where the number is and where it goes. And let's see if we can make more valuable, helpful, dynamic content that's based on current information that's hard for humans to keep up to date.
Exactly right. And the change is morphing into the other disciplines as well. While you were saying that, I thought, oh yeah, search engine indexing. I mean, yeah, we don't even know how many pages are on the web, but I guarantee you that Google doesn't have all of them. They have a lot. It's
Right.
over a trillion, and it keeps going. And content keeps going away, even though it may have been valuable. So
Right.
that tenuousness makes it very difficult as well.
It makes me wonder about the role of the information of the Internet Archive in
Right.
capturing the history of the web and representing it in a way that we can revisit it into the past. And maybe those capturing mechanisms are extremely important now, not just for history's sake, but to prevent kind of this self gobbling up of all of our information,
Right.
regurgitated
Right.
again and again, like a funhouse mirror.
And done in a way that is, non-threatening, for lack of a better word. Many people talk about how Wikipedia is such a great resource because it's crowdsourced, and Google relied heavily on Wikipedia, but not realizing that pretty much anyone can go in and rewrite someone else's work. I mean, you can go in and put anything you want in some of those if you're go through the process of being validated as an editor, and it will stay there until someone who knows differently
Flags it.
calls up and says, "This has to be changed." So that sort of tainted my view of Wikipedia as the ultimate go-to, unless you're trying to find out what episode you left off on for, Umbrella Academy and what happened since
Yeah.
you last visited that series.
Yeah, not going to kill anybody again, right? Like
I know, I hope so.
when you get your Netflix schedule wrong. But what if you thought about documentation, like as a point of truth for products and the official documentation, and you had a company that produced semantically rich documentation that both could create a knowledge graph and could also feed the LLM with the content that it needs, or maybe a private, library of content. I think the importance of information architecture becomes relevant in ways that some information architects may not understand yet. And that's the way that you organize the content informs the LLM, because the LLM is looking for patterns to predict. And so if your content's all over the place, you got all people doing different things. Some people put 3 screenshots in their documentation. Some people put a title, but a subtitle. Some other people don't use a subtitle. It becomes, I think, easier for the LLM to make some inferences that might be incorrect. Whereas if you were guided by an authoring tool, let's say an XML powered authoring tool that was following a schema, that schema would have rules in it that says, this is where you can have one title and no more. You can insert a paragraph, and after a paragraph, you can't insert a title from the because we already have one title, right? So there's rules in there, and that makes our XML structured content more predictable for these machines, which means it's less likely to make an error. But that predictability is just based on where I place those things in the page when it crawls it, except for XML as semantic information, which a lot of us don't use in the way that would be useful to the machine as much as we would like to think we do. Let me explain why.
Yeah.
I think we use semantics to add metadata to our content for publishing. So we can make a version of the documentation that's appropriate for a bank manager and another one that's appropriate for a bank cashier, because they both need to know some of the same things, but not all the same things. So we can do that easily, and we can map that out, and we have a structure and we have definitions, but we also tell the machine this content is based on this role. It's for this kind of person,
Sure.
not for that kind of person. And a lot of information architects are thinking, oh, well, I do that. And then on the page where we generate, yeah, but you're not generating the content anymore. You're giving instructions to a machine that will be queried by somebody, and then the machine will generate some answers. And I think our information architecture decisions and whether or not we create structured, semantically rich content could have positive and negative impacts on the way that generative AI behaves. Does that make sense to your brain?
Absolutely.
Or am I off on that?
That absolutely makes sense, and it would be operable if we could, um, actually do soft system methodology as opposed to just talking about it at conferences. Because all too often what happens is the information architect comes up with that kind of relationship mapping or whatever and goes into an environment where the developers say, "We can't do that."
Yeah.
Or, "We can do that with custom code," which, by the way, makes my blood run cold. It absolutely makes my blood run cold because you don't want that.
No.
So in the end, I think it's true that information architecture and content strategy absolutely has a crucial role in, the development of smart, ethical, and truly intelligent applications.
And
But
they're
that we have
intertwined.
to work on that.
They're intertwined, and now we can't untangle them. It's like
Exactly.
I have a friend who told me he's somebody I consider he's a little older than me and has some knowledge and wisdom I don't have. And he basically said one of the challenges that you have, and I think you was a big you, but people like Scott, is that
Yeah.
you know too much. You already know what's possible and how it kind of works, and then all these other people over here don't know that, so they make assumptions that are incorrect, and then they end up making these mistakes, and then we get frustrated like parents. Parents, when I was a kid, I remember my mom and my grandmother probably did this too. I would ask a question, and then the answer would be because, and then I'd be
Right,
like,
because I
because
said so.
why? Because I said so. And then you pressure them a little more, and then they say, when you're older, you'll understand.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I'm totally older, and I totally understand now. I understand that these information decisions don't seem critical when you're just working on the fly on a deadline and your boss
Yep.
isn't mad at you, and then you produce some content and they don't bitch at you. So everything's good. But the
Yeah.
reality is now it's out of the box and people are using it in ways that are unpredictable. We have a great opportunity as information architects, content creators, and content strategists to kind of jump into the pool, get into the mix, and help build out what this is going to look like in the future. I mean, maybe it's naive, but it seems like if we don't jump into the pool with everybody else, we'll just be left on the side waiting for somebody to invite us in.
Exactly, and I know we both got the same notification, but I do wanna ask, we absolutely need to do that, but we need to know more about how that world works so
Yeah.
that we can ask the right questions. And my last question for you is, are there any questions that you wished I had asked that you would like to answer now? Like, like, "Gee, I wish she had asked me about,
I mean, I guess like
data or something."
there's so many. I think that what I'd like to know is, am I alone in thinking that information architecture is something that we should be considering before we feed the LLM? Because there just seem to be so many practical, intellectually relevant reasons. But until somebody does it and then somebody else does it and breaks it and makes it do something it's not supposed to do, it's really hard for us to know whether our common sense is actually going to play out. Like I think investing time in the content that we use to train the engine is better than throwing a bunch of stuff into the engine. I'll give you one example. On a Facebook post, Facebook introduced the new ability to summarize the comments. In the comments, it summarized the comments, but what it didn't recognize, because it's not human, is that in
Yes,
the comments there's a post, right? A post about, hey, I love this thing. And in the post, somebody says, oh, I'm so happy about your new book. That person did not write anything about a new book. They wrote about another person. So now the
right,
AI thinks that the other person is writing a book called blah blah blah. When the other person is just being mentioned and tagged, they're unaware that they're in the discussion. They're unaware that Meta thinks they're writing a book and is now summarizing and telling everybody they are.
right, right.
So I took a screenshot of it and sent it to the person who was just mentioned. Remember, they weren't the ones making the Facebook post. They were just tagged in it. And I said, did you know that Google thinks you're writing a book called blah, 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 and it'll be out in the spring? Get busy.
Yeah, right.
So it was information architecture, right? Could have played a role there, but that's hard because now we're talking about contributions in the comments section, which is
Right.
even more unruly and unstructured than anything else.
Well, and that Google now sees Reddit as a primary source of user-generated content
Yeah, user
because it
everything.
doesn't have an agenda. It just has a silo like we're talking about, the new Zelda Ocarina of Time game, and everyone here seems to be experts on it, so we're going to elevate this content. As for information architecture, I think it's at a crossroads, and that the ability to focus exclusively on front end information architecture is fading away into UX. And you see that at the conferences. We're at the conference and the IA summit. Half of the sessions are about user experience, which is part of IA. But I'm hoping that what we've talked about, ontologies and knowledge graphs and structured markup and all of that, relationships and semantics, that we'll be able to take that into what is next information architecture.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's our job. We need to get out there and be advocates. I realize that my content strategy evangelist title kind of implies that that's what I do. But it's really all of our jobs to explain. If customer experience leaders in your company say that customer experience matters, then the customer experience that the content provides matters, because you can't have a customer experience without some kind of content to experience, whether it be some kind of sensual thing, a smell, a temperature, or whatever, music, or whether it's actual words that you hear or read or see or pictures. They're all important. And if we don't understand how these machines are going to deliver that content and what they will do to it and what they're capable of, we won't be able to guarantee that the customer experience can be what they would like it to be. And those leaders need to understand that we need resources in order to make our content, prepare content to be consumed by these machines so they can get that experience they want at the other end.
Exactly. And that we need to meet in the middle, meaning your area is completely complex. You need to explain it to me in a way that I can understand, and I need to do the same with you. That the education is bidirectional; it's not just one direction.
That is a great example of how we could use generative AI. We could
Yep.
ask it to help us explain to somebody who does not need to know what a large language model is, but they need to know why we need to know.
Exactly. And has done it well. The syllabus for my class I put into Gemini to
Mhm.
see if I had covered the points from all of those perspectives. And in point of fact, it was about 70% there, because only 70% of my class is devoted to the computer science of information retrieval. The other 30% is social science.
Okay.
What about personalization and privacy? What about techno-colonialism and international? All of that is key factors. So I'm hoping that we will be able to do it. I don't know if Joaquin usually pops in by now, but I'm going to keep. Oh, darn! I was going to ask another question.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Grr,
No, you invoked me. Go ahead,
grr.
go ahead.
He's like a genie. You just call his name.
Oh, um, so anyway, I guess I do get to ask another question. You hosted a webinar on adopting generative AI for technical documentation.
Yeah.
Could you share how AI transforms this area?
Oh.
How or it is it changing the content strategy landscape?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I have a second job. So in addition to being the content wrangler, which is my moniker and I can't escape it because after 20 years, people just know me as that. I'm also a content strategy evangelist for a software company. And
Uh-huh.
the software company serves technical communicators.
Yeah.
It's called
Yeah.
Redo, and it's a component content management system, which means it helps the writers make small pieces and manage those pieces and then put them back together again into different variations for different people. Immediately, this company, of course, wanted to jump into the AI turf, and they created a co-pilot to help people with their content production. Of course, a lot of writers immediately jumped in. I don't want that thing writing my content. Most people aren't using it for that. They're using it for the other 40 things you have to do before you write any words. What is it that we have currently today about this product? And as you said, what's in this explanation that might be missing? Is there any other content you know about on the web that might be relevant to what we're doing? And all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of new ideas. So brainstorming, idea generation, that kind of thing. Second, in order to make content that's semantic, they have to understand how to be structured authoring professionals. Structured authoring takes knowledge and training. And so the AI chatbot is helping direct people to create structured content in the way that they're supposed to, in accordance with the rules that are set up in the systems that they've designed for their production of their content.
Mhm.
So that the thing is not generating the content, it's helping the humans do more. It's
Right.
also helping the humans say, oh, I noticed I did something and I've been doing it for the last 3 weeks and it's wrong. I need to go back and find every instance of that and change it. But it's not just a find and replace. It might be a more complicated
Sure.
location of the information, assessment of whether it needs to change, and then making the required change. But they're doing it in one fell swoop. And then third, they're using that to understand the basic markup language underneath it so that they can become proficient faster, and the tool guides them toward the right answer instead of making them make a mistake, this is the old way, trying to generate it, getting an error message, and then having to decide what does that error message mean. And then if you can't decide, go chase the support down, try to find out if they know. So I think there's a secret thing happening behind the scenes where there's a lot of use of generative AI that's not spitting out content for public consumption, but it's helping the people like you, a professor or a teacher or a lecturer, like me, a presenter or a book author, or like somebody who's a tech writer, do the preparatory work, clean, maintain, suggest augmentations and improvements, and then help along the way. I think that's the magic behind the scene. And when we see case studies in the future, I predict that's where the savings are going to be first.
And absolutely. And that it will inspire changes in how we do our jobs. I mean, at the university, there's been a lot of debate about, the pedagogy of instruction and how you measure, and classes that rely on extremely long term papers or things like that are spinning themselves into butter at how to find ways to better measure students' ability to, get the knowledge or get what was intended. And now they can't, because you can just go and tell generative AI, write me a 20-page paper on Mao Zedong and hit these points, and it'll come out with that. And who can tell?
I think one thing that I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think is the important thing to add at the end is that as writers, so in the technical writing example with Hereto, the content writers are writing components of content as small and concise as possible, but communicative in the way that it needs to be, like gives you everything you need to know, but nothing more.
Right.
Now they're afraid to use generative AI to allow their customers to crawl that data, because they're afraid that the LLM will learn other things from the internet and spit out information. But before he cuts us off, that's important, because technical writers create how-to content, which means if you ask an LLM that sees that content how to do something, it will tell you how to do it. It does not tell you why you want to do it, why you don't want to do it, what happens if you decide I'm not doing that. But if you were to insert additional content, so of course, information architects need to know that we say less is more, but to the LLM, more is more and better. And then you train the LLM to spit out the minimal amount of explanation, but you have to give it the maximum amount of knowledge for it to do so.
Indeed. More. I could go on forever. Hello, Joaquin. How are you? You don't want us to go on forever. We have to go on forever in about 15 minutes.
We're going to have more in 15 minutes. We're just going to take a little break. I just want to add to this, because it's very interesting, the way and direction that this conversation is shaping up. We don't have to be completely technical to start playing around with these technologies. The sooner we start playing around with these technologies, the sooner we see the limitations of these different techniques. We don't want to advocate for people to be tool-centric, but tools are the fastest way for us to get involved with this technology. So, I mean,
your advice is sound, and I'd add to that your experience with the tool is not indicative of the technology. It is only indicative of what you know about that thing, and we are in danger because of what we don't know. It's what we know. We don't know what we don't know. And so if you think that ChatGPT equals generative AI, then you should also think that WordPress equals content management, which we know isn't the case. It's only appropriate for some content. If you want semantically enhanced small components of content, you need a content management system. If you need really mature AI, you maybe just can't use the out-of-the-box free ChatGPT, because it's not going to be industrial strength enough for you. But in the future, I would predict all that's going to be weaved into every one of our products, and all of our information architects will be capable of doing miraculous things.
And I just want to say that tools are not as useful unless they are accompanied by intellectual curiosity. And that's what I want to see. I want to see everyone here to become more intellectually curious about everything they've heard about and start digging in and using it while they use those tools.
Where's the applause button for that, Mary Ann? I think
Hey, thanks.
we need that. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back promptly at 3:15 Eastern time zone. So,
Excellent.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks. Enjoy your day.